The title of this story is Six Dots, a story of young Louis Braille, by Jen Bryant and illustrated by Boris Kulikov. And you can see down here that the dots of Braille are representative of the letters in their names, so we can see what those letters look like. On the cover, there's a quote from Helen Keller. "We, the blind, are as indebted to Louis Braille as mankind is to Gutenberg." Helen Keller was blind, deaf, and dumb. Also, I should tell you that Gutenberg is the one who invented the printing press so that people all over the world could read. On the other side is the Braille alphabet, including question marks, exclamation marks, apostrophes, commas, hyphens, and periods. And then at the bottom, the capital sign that's placed before a letter, and the number sign that's placed before the letters A and J for the numbers 1 through 9 and 0. On the next page, there's a pronunciation guide, so Mrs. Miller can turn back for some of the French words, and I want to make sure that I can say them correctly. So if I turn back, that's what I'm doing. Because Louis was French. "On the day I was born, Papa announced me to the village. 'Here is my son Louis!' The parents came, clucking their tongues, whispering, 'Too small, he won't survive.' Oh, but I did survive. I was a curious child, and my eyes studied everything. Mama's gentle face, lace draping my cradle, the smooth shape of a bread loaf on the table. I grew strong and healthy. When I rode to the baker's on my brother's broad shoulders or fed the chickens with my sisters, the villagers waved and smiled. 'Oh, so handsome!' they cried. 'And clever too,' my sisters said. At 3, I knew everyone in Couvray by name. I counted the eggs in my sister's basket and the sparrows in the trees, and I repeated stories I heard word for word. But what I loved most was to watch Papa work. People came from far away to have a harness made or a broken bridle mended. In Papa's hands, the rough leather strips became smooth and useful. I wanted to be just like him. But when I reached for a tool, "Ne touche pas! Don't touch that," my father warned. Then more gently, "You're too small yet, Louis. Wait until you're older." What is the text structure that people use when they write a biography? You'll notice that this story begins when Louis was born. And as you can see by the illustrations, he's getting older. "Too small! Those words! I wanted to be bigger, stronger, older. Perhaps if I showed Papa what I could do." The leather was smooth. The owl was sharp. I knew just how to... "Papa! Papa!" It's easy to make an inference on this page about what happened, even though the author doesn't describe it. If you look at the illustration, you can see the owl, which is the tool, the sharp tool, falling to the floor. I don't see any blood. My life changed that day. Okay, I gotta go back. Do you see how he's covering his eyes in the illustration? My life changed that day. A healer bandaged my eye. Again I heard, "Ne touche pas! Don't touch!" But the bandage itched so much. My hands, like the sparrows in the trees, were small and quick. I couldn't keep them away. I didn't mean to make things worse, but I did. The infection spread to my other eye until... I want you to look for the cause and effect. And also the comparison. He compares his hands to something. I could see nothing at all. No trees or sparrows, no faces, no lace or loaves of bread. By the time I turned 5, I was completely blind. The villagers whispered, "Poor Louis Braille, such a clever boy. What will happen to him now?" My world was dark and dangerous. I stumbled about the house, banging into chairs, the walls, the door. My body ached. "Where is the sun?" I cried. Let's compare this illustration to the one before. These 2 pages show us how important illustrations are to describe feelings and the way that Louis saw the world and how much things changed for him. But the sun did not come. I sat by the window, training my ears to do what my eyes could not. Clang, bang, kish, kish. That was Papa in his shop. Swoosh, swish, swoosh, swish. Long-skirted ladies hurrying to the market. The illustrator is showing us how Louis is seeing with his eyes. Clomp, 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 stomp. Soldiers marching down the street. Grr, grr. Roof, roof, grr. The neighbor's angry dog chained too tight. Alone in the dark. I knew just how he felt. Now, this comparison is one that I'm going to ask you to talk about. How is young Louis like the dog who is chained too tight? My family did what they could. Papa made a wooden cane. Each day I walked a little farther. Tap, 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 tap. Counting the steps between the house and the garden, the vineyard and the chicken coop, the bakers and the millers, and back to Papa's shop. My brother taught me to whistle. Vree, vree, vree! And when the sound echoed back, it warned me of things in my path. My sisters made a straw alphabet. Papa made letters with leather strips or by pounding round-topped nails onto boards. With Mama, I played dominoes, counting the dots with my fingertips. There are two things I want you to notice in this story. The onomatopoeia in the text, which would be really important to Louis since he couldn't see, and the way the dominoes are made. I think this is an example of foreshadowing. The village priest taught me to recognize trees by their touch, flowers by their scent, and birds by their song. I listened closely as he read to me from the Bible and from words of poetry. Do you have books for blind children? I asked. No, Louis, the priest replied. I'm sorry. This is another example of foreshadowing, isn't it? I love the way the illustrator put a bird on his shoulder. When I was older, I went to school with the other village children. All day they wrote down words and numbers or read out loud from printed pages. I sat in the front row listening and memorizing. Do you have books for blind children? I asked again. No, Louis, the teacher replied. I'm sorry. But I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. I just wanted to read and to write on my own like everyone else. Does it help us when we have problems? When people feel sorry for us? The Marquise, a noble lady living nearby, heard about me. She wrote a letter to the Royal School for the Blind asking if I could study there. Finally, a reply came. Bienvenue! Bienvenue! Welcome, Louis. All right, I'm going to show you what I just did. If you look down at that French word for welcome, I'm going to show you where Mrs. Miller figured out how to pronounce it. Bienvenue. Probably didn't do it right, but hopefully that's close enough. The priest says they have books for the blind, I told Papa excitedly. But you're only 10, Maman cried. And you live there for most of the year, my brother added. Paris is a big city far away, my sisters warned. How could I make them understand? Without books, I would always be poor Louis Braille. I would always be held back, like that dog, chained too tight. I love you, I told them, but I must go. I love the author's message on this page. If you compare and contrast how Louis's family is taking the news of this opportunity for Louis and how Louis is taking the news, we could really see two perspectives and understand why Louis has to go. And we can also understand why pity doesn't help him. I didn't need my eyes to know that the royal school in Paris was not a palace. My hard bed was in a damp, crowded room. My uniform itched. My meals were small and cold. The teachers were strict. The older boys teased and stole. How I missed my home. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because somewhere in this old moldy building, there were books for the blind. Only the best students are allowed to read them, my friend Gabrielle told me. Then I will be one of the best, I replied. Let's look at the text structure here. He is comparing his home with this school, and yet it would seem as if his home were a much better place. But he has something else that he is hopeful, and this hopeful dream he has is part of the solution to his problem. I think when we talk about the difficulties and the challenges that we face and how our attitude helps us to go where we need to go or learn what we need to do, this is a really good example of someone, even though he was very young, understanding what he needs to do to make his life better. And I think part of that is born of desperation. Learning at the blind school was almost like learning in Couvray. I sat and listened. We memorized and recited. We also had music lessons and made slippers in the workshop. As my fingers flew across the organ keys or between the strips of cloth, I dreamed of reading and writing. I worked and studied as hard as I could. Finally, why is reading and writing so important to Louis? It was that day. I want you to check out the emphasis on that. A guide led me to the library. Pronunciation issues again. C'est à vous ici. Sit here, he commanded. There was shuffling, grunting, and scraping, a thud. Voila, there it is, he said. Just trace the raised letters with your fingers. It was a long reach to the top of page 1. My fingers traced the outline of each letter, just as I'd done in Couvray, with straw and leather. But these waxy letters were huge. After reading the first sentence this way, my hand was halfway down the page. A few sentences more, and I had to turn the page. A few more sentences, 2 more pages, and then the end. What is the problem with these huge raised letters making words so blind people can read? C'est tout? Is that all? I asked. There are more, the guide replied, but they're just like this one. Words as large as my hand. Sentences that took up half a page. I sighed. Even if I read 100 books like this, how much could I learn? Do you notice how the illustrations are different on this page again compared to the one that's prior to it? What is the author or the illustrator trying to say by putting the illustration in those black and white sketches. You notice that Louis is still in color. I skipped supper. Wonder what the reason was for that. What is the author trying to say? I lay in bed wishing I was home. You have to make an inference. The author doesn't tell you how he's feeling, but you can figure it out. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed that the neighbor's angry dog broke free. He ran to me, licking my face until I laughed and laughed. Wow! I see a solution. A foreshadowing solution. Louis! Lève-toi! Get up! Gabriel shook me awake. It was morning. The headmaster wants us. Let's go! Allons-y! Now, even though his dream is in black and white, there is light shining in from the window and the dog with a broken chain. I think this dream is really important. Everyone had gathered in the big room. Dr. Pignet spoke. A French army captain has invented a code to send secret messages during battle. The code is read by touch, not by sight, so we might use it here too. You're each holding a message written with patterns of dots, the headmaster continued. Each pattern stands for a sound, such as oo or e or sh. Do you see how all of these events led up to the idea that Louis had for inventing Braille? We listened as he exclaimed, "It wasn't easy. There was a lot to remember." Flipping my paper over, I moved my fingers from left to right, feeling the dots. "Fall back!" I shouted. Everyone laughed. It was a battle order, of course. But now my heart pounded with hope. I asked for another. Again, I touched the dots. "Supplies arrive at dawn!" "Whee! Yes," the headmaster cried. The others shouted out their messages too. The author does a really good job of expressing something that has arisen in the hearts of these young blind students. What is it that's rising? What is it that is rising up from their hearts? "How are the messages written?" I asked. The headmaster handed me a slate, a wooden frame with a metal piece in the middle. "Slide your paper underneath," he explained. "Now take this stylus, but be careful." The sharp tool was like the owl in Papa's shop. I shivered. I think there's a bad memory coming back. "Use it to punch the code into the paper," he said. I made a few of the complicated dot patterns, and then I flipped the paper so I could read them by touch. In French, that's déjà vu. I think he's thinking, "Oh, I have a bad memory, and it seems like it's happening to me again." But this time, I think things are going to turn out a little differently. What do you think? For many weeks I practiced. Reading by touch using dots was a brilliant idea. at least on the battlefield, but for us, the code was so hard that everyone else in the school had given up. Even a short message takes so many dots, and I can't fit a single symbol under my finger, I complained to Gabrielle. Plus, the captain's code stands for sounds, not for letters. So what? My friend replied. So, why shouldn't we spell words and write sentences like sighted people do? I argued. Before I show you this picture, this illustration, I want to compare something from the beginning of the story. Do you remember this page? When the people of Louis' village said he was so smart, so handsome, so clever. Let's look at this picture. What is Louis always trying to do? And why? This code was a start, but it wasn't nearly good enough. We, the blind, were still held back. Would the captain work on improving it with me? I asked the headmaster. I'm sorry, Louis. He isn't interested, he replied. Sorry! That word! Let's compare all the times in the story where Louis has heard the word sorry, and from people who really care, and how it really hasn't helped him, has it? Even when we feel sorry, sometimes it doesn't help. And I want you to think about what Louis did because of the anger that he felt. A lot of people say feeling angry is always bad, but I don't think anger is wrong. I think what you do with it is the part that really counts. You can use it for good or ill. Long ago, I had watched Papa take rough leather strips and make them useful. Now I knew what I had to do. Late at night, while others slept, I bent over my slate and punched the pages. I tried hundreds of ways to simplify the captain's code. I worked until my back was stiff and my fingers ached. Often I fell asleep a few minutes before morning. These illustrations are so powerful. Why do you think we see both? And the key word here is see. This one and this one. A year passed, then another and another. That winter I turned 15. I was often sick, but I wouldn't rest. What is the illustrator trying to say on that page? It's a very strong message. Finally, it was ready to test. I asked the headmaster to choose something from his own library, a book I'd never heard of before. Please read it out loud, I said. Dr. Pignet began. After a few minutes, I interrupted. You can go much faster, sir. As he read, I copied down the words, spelling each one correctly. Do you know how I showed you how plot is like a roller coaster? And all of the problems are the picture of the car on the roller coaster going to the top before it goes down, and how the top is the climax. I think we just hit it in this story. My new code used just 6 dots, arranged in 2 columns like dominoes. Each dot pattern stood for a letter of the alphabet. "Fini!" said Dr. Pinet when he reached the end of chapter 1. "Finished!" I turned my pages over, reading by touch. I recited the entire chapter. "Louis! Tu l'as fait! You did it!" he shouted. I think Mrs. Miller's getting better at French. Word spread quickly. The other students rushed to try it. "C'est facile! So easy! Et si vite! And so fast! We can read the words and write letters like everyone else." As my friends traded messages, I remembered watching Papa in his shop, bent over rough strips of leather, making them useful. I had become like him, after all. Oh, I love that. I love how a terrible day in his father's shop has a different message for Louis, and how he compares this day with the person he wanted to become. Wow. What are some things that you can think of that describe Louis and the effect of his perseverance? This is the author's note. If I asked you to make a list of great inventors, who would be on that list? Gutenberg, the one who invented the printing press? Da Vinci, he invented a lot of things, and he was a beautiful artist. Edison, who invented the light bulb? And then there are Bell, Franklin, Marconi, Tesla, Carver, Whitney, Hopper, just a sampling of more names you might consider based on the number, kind, and overall impact of their creations. Impact, that's an effect word. But do you know that nearly every single day, whenever you're in school, a restaurant, a hotel, elevator, bank, or other public space, the invention of a teenager is there too? The name Braille deserves to be on everyone's list of great inventors, just like the others. He recognized a rough idea and worked exhaustively to shape it into something that changed the world forever. Unlike those other inventors, however, Braille was a child inventor who worked alone and without public support or financial backing. Living in a converted prison, building and already suffering the early signs of lung disease, Louis Braille managed to create a system of reading and writing for the blind that is still used today. In the past centuries, no one so young has developed something that has had such a lasting and profound impact, there's that word again, on so many people. This is my second book about Louis Braille. In 1994, my young adult biography of Braille was published as part of the series Great Achievers, Lives of the Physically Challenged. The book was designed to inform, and it did so well enough, I think. But more recently, as I encountered examples of the Braille alphabet in public libraries and on college campuses, in airports and on ATMs, I asked myself, what did it feel like to be Louis Braille? Nothing I'd read about the young Frenchman, including my own account, had led me to experience Braille's emotions. What was it like to be like Louis Braille? This story is my attempt to answer these questions.